If you're enjoying the Heath Geeks Book Club podcast, we'd appreciate if you hit the subscribe button, leave a like, rating, or review, whichever your preferred podcatcher platform allows.
This episode is sponsored by Well Balanced Nutrition and 360 Health.
Welcome to the Heath Geeks Book Club podcast. Listen in as Kristen Norton and Eleanor Russell review all those great health and wellness books you've been wanting to read or you have read and want to talk about. Here's Kristen and Eleanor.
Hello, everybody. This is the Health Geek talking to another Health Geek. Hey, Kristen.
Hey, hey.
And we have Tim with us who's helping us get to the airway.
Hello.
Yeah. And today we're going to continue our conversation about Ethan Kross's book called, it's actually a national bestseller, 2021. Chatter is the title. The Voice in Our Head, Why It Matters, and How to Harness It. We kind of laid the groundwork in episode 1, and now we want to kind of continue the conversation about how we talk to each other, not just ourselves.
Yeah. So in the book, Ethan Kross brings up one thing I like is he doesn't just say in one study this happened. He tells us a little bit more background about the study or the author of the study.
Yeah, the history, yeah.
The history. So in the late 1980s, Belgian psychologist Bernard Rhyme was intrigued to know, do we want to talk about our negative experiences?
Yeah.
So, yes, our inner voice drives us to talk to others, especially about those negative experiences. And the more intense the emotion was, the more he found we want to talk about it. And his research found this same result was true regardless of people's age, education level, gender, culture, or geographical area. So it is just human nature. If we are feeling something negative,
we
want to
blah. Share that.
Yeah. Just talk about it and talk about it and talk about it. But there's some issues with oversharing and venting because Ethan Kross goes on to say that really pushes people away if we're oversharing. So while we're
He calls that a social repellent.
Oh, a social repellent.
I like that one.
Yeah.
Oh, you're socially repellent.
And
Yeah, I've been told that.
Yes, I know. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, by me.
Your inside voice, right?
Yeah.
So while we're reaching out for maybe comfort and connection, it can really backfire if we're doing it too much, and then we experience social isolation.
Which we know is not good.
And then, with this crazy twist of virtual world comes in social media.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying. The first thing they ask you when you log on to Facebook, which I hear is old stories now, but anyway, what's on your mind? Just begging you to put that negative thing out there because you really want to tell somebody that negative stuff, right?
Yes. Yeah,
because that's
it's
what
human
gets
nature.
people to read it.
Yeah,
we want to talk and talk and talk.
Yeah, and then some of us try not to do that, but you find yourself sucked in sometimes.
And here, you wonder why. Why is the social media land so full of negativity and people voicing their opinions? And he points this out that there's two features of social media that are troubling. One is empathy, and the second is time. Mm-hmm. So first, research shows that observing other people's responses, like if I see your face and you're starting to wince a little bit, or you're quivering in your voice, I can tell, and I would experience empathy.
Yeah, and they call those physical gestures or micro-expressions, the intonation of our words even.
Yeah.
And it's absent on the digital world.
Completely absent. So then our brains are deprived of that information that serves as a critical role, like an inhibiting cruelty and antisocial behavior.
Yeah, those things that I just mentioned, the physical gesture, like you said, the wince, or the micro-expression, just a quiver, or that intonation is a trigger for the empathy that you mentioned.
Right.
And so, like you said, if we're not empathetic, then those results you just talked about, what'd you say, the violence or something?
Just inhibit. We can't experience the empathy, which would inhibit the cruelty and the antisocial behavior. So we have no kind of filter.
Nope.
So it's just easy to put things out there and not think of other people's feelings because we're not going to see those
Right.
or hear them. And then the other is time. So the passage of time is essential. We can reflect on something. Maybe we feel less intense about it over time. But with social media,
In that moment, we can do it.
it's instantaneous.
Yeah, that the idea, another thing that's going on here with the social media thing is the self-presentation that I mentioned earlier. We want to present ourselves as attractive and desirable and those sorts of things. But when we get into the social media world and we start seeing other people's things, we are then called to compare.
And despair.
So we start comparing, and then that can lead to what we call envy. I believe that's one of the 7 deadly sins, isn't it?
It is.
Yes. So what we're talking about is if you have a social, we want to socially present, and that gives us a social high, and that gets us a dopamine kick. And so that's another reason I post a picture of my haircut on Facebook, It's like, I got a social high on that. Oh, good. I got some dopamine. What am I thinking? Who cares about the dead hair on the table, But I was presenting myself.
Well, it's natural. And he
Is
says
it?
that people, whether it's good or not.
Yeah,
it's
I just could have
human
kept that to
nature.
myself. Yeah, there you go. It is human nature.
And he even points out that in one study, it showed that people would rather share something about themselves than receive
Yes, money. Wow, is that amazing?
And isn't money pretty powerful?
I think so. I'd like to,
And that it's human nature to share more than it is to want money. That was mind-blowing.
Yeah, but I guess as far as evolution goes, to be able to bond together and share keeps the tribe together and protects us.
We want to belong.
And that empathy connects us as well. So, if it gets out of whack, though, which is what he's talking about in this book, when it goes sour,
right,
and it doesn't work for us, you instead of going down this social high and get the dopamine pleasure reward, you end up in that comparison and the envy thing after you may put your thing out there, and that is perceived as a threat, and then your hypothalamus gets kicked in, and then your
What'd you call me?
your pituitary, hypothalamus, pituitary, and your adrenal, and the cortisol. And we've been through that stress response in several of our conversations, and it creates a suppression on your immune system. It affects your cardiovascular system. It's not healthy.
Right.
So getting control of the chatter could be a good idea.
Right. And it's interesting because we're driven to be social, whether in person or on social media, but he's pointing out that it's not helpful.
And didn't we read a book about breaking up with our smartphone?
We sure did. And that's
Seems like
making
it's
a lot of sense in this case, especially. Yeah. So it can, if we're over talking, it can lead us to isolation. If we're oversharing and we get to comparing on social media, it could lead to negative.
Can I say another little story he puts in here that I thought was a really clever analogy? He calls it the piano analogy.
Oh, I liked that one.
Yeah.
Do
And
share.
so as we're kicking out these harmful chemicals from the stress response, he says, think about your DNA as a set of piano keys. And you're tinkling on the piano keys, ding, ding, ding. And so these chemicals are knocking around on the ivories and actually changing some of the DNA. And that's that generational damage that we are beginning to learn more and more about. That there's things that can happen emotionally. Emotional pain is very similar to physical pain, and it can cause the same kind of physical damage long term. And then it can be incorporated into the genetic information.
And lead
can
to
be
inflammation.
moved. But it also can then be transferred to another generation through reproduction, which is that nature-nurture struggle that my husband and I used to argue about all the time. He was very much a nature, and I was a nurture. It's like, no, if you just treat everybody great, it'll be wonderful. He says, no, look at our dogs. All those puppies are different,
That took me back to the Genie in Your Jeans book.
Yes, exactly.
That little story he shared.
Yeah. The way we talk to ourselves can have some ramifications. And so when he met another one of his friends he wanted to tell us about, he was teaching a spy in his class. And she was a high school student. Her story starts in high school. She came from a pretty difficult community. And in her high school, they saw that she had some excellence, and they introduced her to some recruiters who were with the National Security Agency. And they said, hey, we'll pay for your college education if you join us. And she said, that's my ticket out of here. So she joins this program and gets to Harvard. And then she's thinking, I don't really like the stuff they're making me study. I don't really want to be doing this. But now I'm into hock for this Harvard education. And if I don't do this, how am I going to get off the hook? And then her mind chatter goes nuts. You remember the story?
I do.
And so there's a technique that they talk about that I have actually used since I read this book because it was such a grabbing thing. It's called psychological distancing. And where she became so focused, a narrow focus on, I got to take these classes, these people that are going to buy my future for me and let me have a nice life. I got to do these horrible things all over the world. She was getting in a really struggle with what she'd gotten into. Once she got a wide angle on that and opened her purview, and he called it zooming out. Mm-hmm. And he has a whole chapter developed about how if you can get yourself up out of the weeds, and what we said, get out of the forest. You can't see the forest for the trees.
Right.
We've heard this before. It's really not some news, but boy, putting it into action and getting a psychological distance can help our psychological immune system. And then when we feel better, because if you're sick, you don't feel good. And it's around page 49, he was talking about the Marshmallow Man.
Oh, I don't remember that.
Walter Michael, this experiment where he takes the kids and he puts the marshmallows on the table.
Yes.
It's also called delayed gratification. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you ask the child, if you don't eat that marshmallow, you'll get 3 more later. But then the investigator leaves the room and the kids are looking at that marshmallow, and pretty soon one of them is eating the marshmallow. Can't wait. Mm-hmm. And then they follow those people as they grow up, and they find the ones that have self-control do have a better life going forward.
I liked becoming a fly on the wall.
That's another zooming out and getting that wide angle picture, yeah.
Yeah, so he has people who are having an internal conversation about something stressful. Either reimagine that conversation as themselves or as a fly on the wall. Mm-hmm. And those who imagine themselves as the fly on the wall had a better time getting a wider perspective and coming to terms with
it's because they distance themselves from themselves and they're watching themselves rather than participating.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's that thing that he also mentions, but we've heard before, is we're often more critical of ourselves than we are of our friends. Mm-hmm. So if we can learn to talk to ourselves like we would talk to our friends, it gets better. And you have that distance, that psychological distance, just that amount. And I think the fly on the wall is that same idea.
Yeah, I loved that. And I also, at Well Balanced Nutrition, ask people to, channel their inner nurturer versus their inner critic, right? Like, you might not be able to quiet or, completely quiet that critic, but you can harness this inner nurturer and say, is that something I would say to my friend, my mom, my daughter? If not, then let's
just
give
shut
it
up.
Yeah, let's not give it the time of day.
And physiologically, what that's doing for us is it's reducing the stress response so that our chemical signaling is calming down. Right. And then we're more able to have the self-control because we're not in threat.
Exactly.
Which takes us back to the immediate right here. I got to do something right here.
And you know what he points out that a lot of people think is the right thing to do is just distract themselves from their chatter, right? Like, I'm having a bad day. I'm just going to go watch
shopping.
Netflix.
I'm going to go shopping.
I'm going to scroll on my phone.
Oh, God, no.
And the studies say that works, but it's a short-term fix. It's a Band-Aid that obscures the wound without healing it. And so he really influences us to use these tools like distancing and zooming out, be a fly on the wall, be your own friend, because that's really how you start to feel better long term. What other strategies are in this particular chapter?
On zooming out?
Zooming out, yeah.
Those were my favorite parts of it. The idea of self-control.
There was Solomon's Paradox. I didn't highlight too much on that.
Well, then we can go
Time travel.
Oh, that's an excellent one. I
Yeah.
love the time travel idea. Tim, you want to go on a time flight?
I would love to. I have always been fascinated and wished that I could travel through time.
But you can, and that's what happened to Tracy, or I think Tracy was the spy.
She delved into her family's
Yeah.
history. The calmer
She had to clean
noticed
out a
herself-
house, right? She was cleaning out a
Right,
house.
yeah. She said she noticed herself feeling when she returned to Harvard. On one hand, as she tapped into the legacy of her forebears, she seemed to be demonstrating to the world that a descendant of slaves could achieve success at one of the most prestigious institutions in the world. In spite of her difficulties at Harvard, this historical perspective gave her a bird's eye view of how far she had come, even
love
making her think her ancestors would be proud of her.
And that helped her chatter.
I thought that was
I
profound.
loved it. And we can time travel, and it doesn't take long to jump to another time in your life, or in this case, your ancestry. Or you can even go forward and say, 5 years from now, I'm going to be sitting on a beach and having a great time. It's going to be nice.
Exactly. It says studies show that when people are going through a difficult experience, asking them to imagine how they'll feel about it 10 years from now, rather than tomorrow, this can be another remarkably effective way of putting their experience into perspective.
Yeah, and when we talk about cognitive behavioral therapy, I think they do visualization in that practice, which is what we're talking about. If you can visualize a better outcome, your brain chemicals start changing to a positive pathway, which then allows you to find your next step here in the present. I mean, it's really interesting that it would, because you're going away to find out what to do now, and it works because you can calm down. The idea of saying your name is a really helpful thing, and I have done that so many times. As a matter of fact, I did it this morning because I thought we were going to be reviewing another book that we're not reviewing, and I was squeezing it in there, trying to get all my little ideas together, and I thought, okay, Eleanor, you've got this. Don't worry about it. And then I thought of Mel Robbins and how Kristen and I have done the high five habit. We've hit the mirror and said, we got this. We can do this. And that was the idea of talking to yourself, but actually using your name. Eleanor, you've got this. And he gave some great examples of people like LeBron James and Malala and Fred Rogers. But Malala is the gal that got that head injury. As she's Pakistani, I believe, and was shot in the head.
Shot in the head, yeah.
Yeah, and they asked her, what would you say to your persecutors? And she had all sorts of wonderful wisdom statements. But at one point, she said, Malala, I will just throw my shoe. She used her first name to help her get through some of these. Instead of going down into the corner and becoming a vegetable, this woman raised herself up from this bad situation.
There's nary a day that goes by that I don't go, Tim, you dumbass.
Yeah, well, no. well, Tim, you got this.
Oh, no. But I quickly fix it. I'm not downing myself. It's all right, get out of that silliness and get back to what you were doing.
Okay. Well,
yeah. I don't
Beat yourself up too bad.
No.
Okay.
No.
Using your name is a very quick language tool that creates emotional distance because it makes you feel as if you're talking to another person when you're talking to yourself. So, if it feels like too much to time travel or be your best friend or whatever, just simply say your name and see if that can kind of give you a little bit of relief from that chatter.
Yeah, and when I said, Eleanor, you've got this, the other idea is to use that second person you.
Right.
You can do this. You're on top of it. You're as prepared as you can be. You'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Just get dressed and get out there.
Right.
But instead of I can't do this. I'm not ready. I didn't do what I said I was going to do. They're going to be disappointed. I'm going to let them That's when we get into a negative chatter spin. So if you can be aware enough to hear yourself saying that, say, let me just change that word to you. And like Kristen said, if you just use your name, it's a little easier. You don't have to think too much.
So it's referred to distance self-talk. And when they studied that, the people using that, they experienced less shame and embarrassment after giving like a impromptu speech, which a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, that's the worst thing ever. So they're stressed about this speech, and they experience less shame and embarrassment compared with the participants who used immersed self-talk, the I's. That I did this, I did that. So in their descriptions of their mental experiences, instead of highlighting their nervousness or the difficulty of the task, they said their inner voices focused on the fact that nothing of real consequence was actually at stake. So it just helped them put it into perspective.
Yeah.
I think that's so cool. So in a lot of my networking, as I was reading this, I was like, let me share a quick little life hack for you. If you're struggling with some negative rumination or nervousness, just say your name. And they kind of looked at me like I was crazy, but maybe you have to listen to the podcast to truly understand
so you were plugging the podcast. I like that. Yeah. That's good advice. The struggles that we have, just learning some little tools could empower us to behave better and have self-control. And really, when you think about it, what really is at stake with so much of what we do? You know,
Right.
we put so much emphasis on things that maybe not need it.
Emphasis.
Yeah, that's another conversation to be had with Elliot Engel. We're going to talk about him one day too.
So you mentioned Fred.
Yes, let's talk about Fred and then.
So this is
Poor guy.
Mr. Rogers.
Yeah.
Even Mr. Rogers has struggled with self-doubt and self-criticism. And so this was the first I've heard of this story. But apparently he wrote a letter to himself, really struggling to write his TV show. And
Can you think about the schedule that guy was on? He was on, every day with the children?
that's a lot.
Yeah, and I don't think I
writing
ever really thought
acting.
that he did it all himself, but he evidently was the creative force behind all that, and it was a huge amount of work, and he ran into a stumbling block, didn't he?
Right. And all he did was he kind of gave himself a pep talk. You know, sometimes when you just write something down on paper, it helps you. But he was writing himself a pep talk, kind of first going through like, oh, this is so hard. But then he brings in a couple elements that the author's sharing with us, like when we realize we're not the only ones going through this. So he kind of brings in a universal idea that, you know, all writers might struggle. And then he calls himself out by name and says, Fred, get to it. And he starts writing.
I loved it.
So I'm like,
What a
oh,
guy.
Mr. Rogers, you're still teaching me things at this age. I love it.
He was always awesome.
Yeah.
So I think Ethan Kross did a really great job of telling these entertaining stories to get the point across that, you know, just even language can distance your emotions and help you manage your self-control and your inner critic.
And I think we probably need to wrap it up for this episode because there's a couple other things I do want to share, and I think you might too, about Ethan's little book. But I think Tim said we're close to our time limit. So I'm Eleanor Russell.
Yeah, get out.
At 360health4u.com. And we have an idea to help supplement people's diet and lifestyle with nutrients that may let some of the biology underpinning all of these things work better. So if you're interested in talking about that, I'm Eleanor Russell at 360health4u.com.
And I am Kristen Norton, one of the registered dietitians at Well Balanced Nutrition, who sponsors this podcast. And we invite you to visit wellbalancednutrition.com to check out some of our resources, DIY guides and courses, or find out if nutrition coaching is right for you with a free coaching clarity call.
And don't forget that you can buy this book and other books that we have or will review on this podcast by visiting healthgeekspodcast.com. Click on any of the books that you see. You'll see the entries. They'll all have the book picture on it. Click on that and it will take you to the post, and you can click on the title of the book and you can purchase it straight from there. And when you do, it does help us. healthgeekspodcast.com. See you later.
Bye.
and opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and are not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted, and no part can be reproduced without the expressed written consent of Kristen and Eleanor.